welcome to another episode of the Red Mic Podcast. I am excited about what is on the agenda today. I think it'll be beneficial and a little bit of fun and filled with a little bit of regret that I had to go through what I went through to produce this episode. But we are going to talk about some of the new conspiracies or people trying to maybe connect dots that aren't to be connected when it comes to Charlie Kirk and his assassination. And then we are going to look at some broader ideas on why this type of thinking and, this type of reasoning is damaging and also dangerous because it's often used against Christians. And so let me start off with this. Scripture warns us against a lot of foolish speculation, and I think what we're going to address today is a somewhat foolish speculation, although I'll try to be fair to the theory that is all over my feed right now, probably because I was researching it. That's why it's all over my feed. In 2 Timothy 2:23, it says, But refuse foolish and ignorant speculations, knowing that they produce quarrels. So we are going to look at something that I think belongs in the category of foolish and ignorant speculation. And so what that comes down to is this surfacing theory that Charlie Kirk's assassination was predicted, that it was somehow prophesied or somebody modeled it off of a movie that released back in the late 1990s with Nicolas Cage. So the movie is Snake Eyes. If you've seen it, I'm sorry. If you have not seen it, I do not recommend. Now, maybe that's a type of movie you like. I got like 35 minutes into the movie. I paid for it. It was only 79 cents on Amazon. Clearly, people are not watching that movie a lot until now. So maybe the makers of the movie created. I'm not actually saying this is the case, but maybe they created this theory to get a lot more people to rent their movie, which would be really smart of them business-wise if they did. But in that movie, there are, as people point out, some coincidences is what I would say, but people think maybe prophetic predictions of Charlie Kirk, and his assassination. So let me lay out the theory before I go into a rebuttal of the theory and then kind of discussing these types of things overall. So here's the theory. Now, I saw, some extended parts to this theory. I'm going to leave that out because they're not good. All right. What we're going to talk about, if it were true, would be, kind of eyebrow raising. Like you'd wonder, how did all of that line up by circumstance? So in the movie, there is a politician that is shot in the neck and killed by an assassin. They are at a large boxing event. Thousands of people are there, and he is killed while watching this boxing event. He is shot in the neck. That is true. That is in the movie. I did watch that, and it's not for kids. We'll just say that. It's not for kids. Where it gets a little bit eerie is the name of the politician is Charles Kirkland. The name of the politician is Charles Kirkland, which obviously sounds like Charlie Kirk, and the individual is a politician who is shot in the neck. The person who is blamed for the shooting, according to this theory, is one of the boxers called the Executioner, if memory serves. That's not in my notes. And his name is Lincoln Tyler. Tyler is his last name. And he's the one blamed for the shooting, but didn't do the shooting. It was actually, he was the fall guy. His name was Tyler. The shooting takes place on September 10th, which is the same day that Charlie Kirk died. And really the entire movie, it's about a cover-up and a fall guy and the people who actually organized it, which was an inside job in a way, are, supposed to parallel this whole idea that Tyler Robinson, the alleged shooter, didn't actually shoot Charlie Kirk. And so there's just, too many coincidences, people say. Too much. You have a person who's a politician shot in the neck, killed on September 10th with the name Charles Kirkland by somebody, in this case with the last name Tyler, which is the first name of the person who allegedly killed Charlie Kirk, again on September 10th. If all of that were true, it would be pretty eerie. It would be pretty eerie if all of those things lined up. Now, if they all lined up, my conclusion probably wouldn't change. I don't think that somebody tried to base it off of this movie. I think with the number of movies that are out there, there are just gonna be coincidences that happen. When you have millions of hours of films, something's gonna line up at one point somewhere in film with things that are happening in the real world. Proverbs 18 verse 17, it has a good piece of advice. This is a piece of advice that we should keep in mind not only here, but in many, many situations. It says, "The first to plead his case seems right, until another comes and examines him." I remember in high school doing debate, and when you're in the audience, people said this all the time, somebody would come up, the affirmative, and they would make their case. And everybody in the audience at that point thought, this is a great idea. And then the negative team would come up and argue against it. And everybody in the audience would think, this is not a good idea. And then the affirmative would come up. Whoever you heard first, you're going to tend to lean that way until perhaps somebody comes and is willing to put some holes in the proposed case, or in this case, the proposed theory. So here is some reflection and thoughts that make it maybe not as coincidental. There are some things that are, coincidental still, but not as coincidental as these memes or these short reels are trying to tell you. Now, again, I rented the movie. I went in to the movie. I found the script of the movie, the original screenplay of the movie, in order to make sure that I had the information correct. So let me start with this. First, I will say what is the case, all right? What is the case is that there is an individual who's a politician. He's the Secretary of Defense in the movie, and so we'll say it's a politician. And his name is Charles Kirkland, and he is shot in the neck. Those are the coincidences. He has a name that is similar. It's not the same name, but it is a similar name. He's a politician. Charlie Kirk wasn't, a politician. He never ran for office. But he certainly was, active in the realm of politics. And so we'll say those are the coincidences. But when you start to break down the other coincidences that people say, there's too many for it to be just a coincidence. For example, the idea that in the film, the shooting takes place on September 10th, which is the same day that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Now, I know where they're getting this from, and in some of the reels that you'll see, they actually show the picture of the screen. So at the beginning of the movie, there's a reporter standing outside of the arena giving a report. I'll come back to some things she says in a moment. And they pan up and they see on the big screen outside where it's announcing the fight that's taking place, they say on the screen it says that the date is September 10th. Now, to the people's credit, if you have a terrible image, you could probably think it says September 10th. If you have a terrible image, maybe you could come away with that. But if you get on the movie, pause the movie, zoom in, and compare where it says supposedly September 10th to where it then says at 10 p.m. right next to it. If you zoom in, you'll notice, and it's pixelated, it's an old movie, but you will notice that the zeros on 10 p.m. and the supposed zero on the 10 for September 10th are not the same. The date that's actually on this poster is not September 10th, it's September 18th. And it's very easy to see, and in the near future, we'll have a video hookup so I can actually show these things on the video itself. But you can see the 2 dots, because it's an 8, there would be 2 empty spaces compared to the zeros on 10 p.m. where there's just 1 clear empty space. I've showed multiple people this. Everybody agrees. It clearly, when you zoom in, is September 18th, not September 10th. So the date is not the date that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Actually, you then go and you compare it to the actual script. And this shows that there was some disconnect between the script writing and then the actual visual that was on the screen. Because in the script, the reporter says that they're here for this big fight and it's taking place on, quote, a holiday weekend. And so if this fight is taking place in September, it's at the very beginning of September. That would have to be Labor Day if it's in September. There is no holiday weekend at September 10th. There is no holiday weekend at September 18th either. So there's a disconnect. But the screenplay, the screenwriter did not intend for it to be September 10th because he says holiday weekend. And then the actual image where they claim it's September 10th does not say September 10th. It says September 18th. And so you can discard this idea that it's taking place on the same day that Charlie Kirk was killed. Next, you have this idea that it's somebody by the same name that is blamed as being the assassin. You have this Lincoln Tyler, right? Last name matches the first name of the suspected killer of Charlie Kirk, and so that's actually not true either. And me just watching in the first 30 minutes and then looking through the script, it's very clear that's not the case. Lincoln Tyler in the movie is not accused of being the shooter or the assassin in the same way that Tyler Robinson is being accused of that. What he's accused of in the movie, and obviously this is going to have spoilers, but you've had, like 26 years or whatever to go watch that movie if you wanted to. In the movie, Lincoln Tyler is accused of having a fixed fight, that he wasn't actually knocked to the ground at the time of the shooting. He was paid off to go down. And so the person who paid him off was doing it in order to get an uproar in the crowd and to cover the shooter for a moment while he took the shot so that it would be hard to know exactly where the shot came from. But Lincoln Tyler in the movie is not the shooter, does not know that there's going to be a shooting. He's not tied to the assassin. As far as he's concerned, he's just paid off to go down. And so he does so, and that's not legal as it presents it in the movie, but it has nothing to do with being the assassin. It just, somebody has the name Tyler. It's not even his first name like the suspected killer of Charlie Kirk. It's the last name of the boxer, and that's the same person who is called the executioner. The actual mastermind is a different character. I'm not going to go into too much of the movie, though, and the plot of the movie. What I want to kind of set straight, though, is only about half the information is even correct, right? Out of the 4 major points, shot in the neck, name Charles Kirkland, September 10th, supposed shooter, last name Tyler, matching the first name of the suspected killer of Charlie Kirk, half of those are untrue. Half of those are not even the case. And so you might be asking, why do this podcast and why waste an hour of your Saturday morning renting and wasting 79 cents in order to watch this movie, in order to see if it's actually true? I think a lot of people fall into this kind of conspirial mindset where we're putting things together that are not meant to be put together, all right? we'll believe anything at this point. We kind of just are interested in whatever the conspiracy is at the time. Proverbs 14:15, it says, "The naive believes everything, but the prudent considers his steps." You know, whatever you see on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever else there is these days, I'm not really up to speed beyond that. What you see on there, if you see a video, man, you have to take things with a grain of salt. You can't just believe everything that you see on there. Even when they put a picture on the screen and say, hey, see, September 10th, it's not September 10th. And look, maybe the people who are sharing those videos don't know. I think some of them, maybe they just want more action on their videos, and it's really cool that they discovered this conspiracy and this connection and this prediction. And even if it's not, the only things that are similar: shot in the neck, high profile political figure, name similar, Charles Kirkland. But let's be real. There are tons of movies where, political individual is shot in the neck. There are tons of movies. Really, the only thing that's kind of weird is that his name is Charles Kirkland, but you just got to pick a name, and it's not the same name. It's just a similar sounding name. And it's not like the writer of the movie would even be able to name it off of Charlie Kirk, because what? Charlie Kirk was maybe 5 years, somewhere around 5 years old, 6 years old when that movie came out. He's not in the public eye at that point. This isn't the first movie where people try to pull these parallels and predictive power. The Simpsons is known for different things that people say were predictive. We have, the Trump presidency is probably the most known one, the prediction. You have the World Trade Center situation. There are a lot of instances where people think that something inside a movie predicted an event that later happened. You have what's called the Lone Gunman in 2001. It came out a couple months before 9/11, and it has planes flying towards the World Trade Center, and people are like, wow, they knew this was going to happen. No, it's just there are only so many plots that you can have in a movie, and eventually those plots are going to overlap with real life. So why is this type of thinking kind of dangerous? Like, why is it that we should avoid this type of thinking in our own lives? These conspiracy theories and this attempt to draw connections between dots that are correlative but not causative is tempting, not just in the modern world, but going back and analyzing the Christian claims, people try to do this as well. It's especially popular when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus. There is a world out there of skeptics and unbelievers that want very much to disprove that Jesus rose from the dead, because it's really difficult to say somebody rose from the dead and to then reject their teachings and say they were wrong. When somebody claims that they're God in flesh and then they say, I'm going to go die and 3 days later I'm going to rise from the dead, and then they do it, it's really difficult to disagree with that person and not feel uncomfortable in the process. And so it's much easier for a skeptic to just discount the resurrection, and it's often done so through these different conspiracy theories and these different narratives, and trying to connect dots that aren't really there to connect in the first place. People try to claim first off that maybe Jesus never even existed, and they'll give little pieces of Jesus's life that are similar to people who lived before Jesus, and maybe the Jesus story was just a made-up story based on all of these other myths and legends. And so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about that particular theory right now. It is highly rejected, obviously in Christian circles, but also in secular, atheist circles. It's highly rejected in the scholar circles. Someone like Bart Ehrman, who is no friend of the Bible, he clearly rejects the idea that Jesus never existed because there's more evidence historically for the existence of Jesus than there is for basically any other person in ancient history. And so we know Jesus existed, even though some people try to pull these pieces together that they were just saying Osiris had a baptism, and so Mithra, he had 12 disciples, and they're trying to put together this picture that Jesus was just this myth based on these other myths. It's the same type of reasoning taking place. It's the same type of reasoning that says a movie from 26 years ago has these few things that are similar to an event, therefore maybe there's a real connection here, when there's not a real connection. When it comes to the resurrection, and this idea of conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories, it's not just this movie, Snake Eyes. Obviously, there's no shortage of conspiracy theories that are going on right now. And not every conspiracy theory is bad. There are going to be some conspiracy theories that are correct. I think there are some correct conspiracy theories. Ben Shapiro, he has some good information on kind of the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. It largely has to do with falsifiability. I don't want to develop that right now. I just want to show you how the other side, how the skeptic, how the unbeliever, how the enemy of the Christian faith often uses this same type of thinking and logic in order to draw conclusions that get them out of having to accept Jesus as Lord. This whole idea of Jesus never existing, that's one of them, but then it goes on. When it comes to the resurrection, the key pivotal event in Christian history, in world history really, the key pivotal event, Jesus died on a cross. 3 days later, he rose from the dead. People don't want to accept it, so they say things like, well, maybe the disciples stole the body, right? Maybe the disciples, they were feeling like, they had followed this guy for 3 years and they don't want to be seen as idiots, right? They don't want to be seen as people who bought into a lie. And so in order to make it so people think that their story is legitimate and that they were not fools for following Jesus, they actually stole the body in order to convince people that Jesus rose from the dead so that people would think, oh, they were smart for following Jesus. And you hear that, and in today's culture, they go, oh, the disciples. Yeah, maybe the disciples did it. Yeah, maybe that's true. But what's the evidence, right? Like, what's the real evidence for the disciples stealing the body? And you're going to figure out quickly if you research this, there is no evidence. There is literally no evidence for the disciples stealing the body. Actually, you have a lot of things that would show that's ludicrous to believe the disciples stole the body. You have the disciples who, if they stole the body, knew that Christianity was a fraud. They knew, if that was the case, that Christianity was not true. And yet, they all go suffer and die for their faith. And you say people die for a lie all the time. True, but people don't die for a known lie. And these are the people who would have known if it was a lie, if they're the ones who stole the body. And so it makes no sense to say the disciples stole the body. Plus, think about this. If the disciples stole the body, why do we have people like Paul, who was an enemy of the Christians, claiming that Jesus appeared to him? Why do we have people like James, the skeptical brother of Jesus, claiming that Jesus appeared to him and that's why he converted? If the disciples stole the body, it doesn't explain why people are seeing Jesus alive. Actually, the best way to explain why people are seeing Jesus alive is because people were seeing Jesus alive, especially when there's the number of witnesses that we have in Scripture. Some people say, well, maybe the disciples didn't steal the body, but maybe they were hallucinating. Maybe they thought the tomb was empty. They went to the wrong tomb, and then they just started hallucinating Jesus appearing to them. Maybe that's the case. Which is really weird again, because groups don't tend to hallucinate together the same thing. Especially in the ancient world where you don't have quite as much access to hallucinogenic drugs. But even if they did, you don't hallucinate the same thing. And we have large groups. We have groups of dozens of people and at times hundreds of people apparently hallucinating Jesus walking in the room. That doesn't make sense. And again, why does James convert? Some people say the disciples would be under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, and they'd be really depressed at this time, and so they wanted to see Jesus, and the stress led to these hallucinations. Why does Paul see him then? Paul has a great life, persecuting Christians, high-ranking official, probably wealthy. Why would he suddenly hallucinate on the road to Damascus that Jesus is appearing to him? He wouldn't. There's no reason to think he would. And so the idea that the disciples were hallucinating doesn't make sense. Maybe the Romans or the Jewish leaders just kind of moved the body later on and they transferred it to another tomb. Again, it doesn't make sense of all the historical data we have, which is that the tomb was to be secure for those 3 days. It was to be sealed for those 3 days. Furthermore, if the Jews and Romans moved the body, when people started preaching that Jesus rose from the dead, why wouldn't they just produce the body? Why wouldn't they just say, here's the body? And moving the body only explains the empty tomb. Moving the body doesn't explain why do they all think they're seeing him? Why are they all citing Jesus? Why are there so many sightings of him after the resurrection or after the empty tomb? There are so many historical facts that we know that lead to the solid conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead. We know that Jesus died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. We have many sources outside the Bible that confirm Jesus actually died, because there's this other conspiracy that maybe Jesus didn't die. Maybe Jesus just passed out. He swooned, right? It's the swoon theory. Maybe Jesus just kind of passed out on the cross. And then he woke up later and he got out of the tomb. So he loses a tremendous amount of blood. He's flogged, he's beaten, and then 3 days later, he gets up and he moves a multi-thousand-pound stone out of his way, beats off the Roman guards at the tomb, and the Bible tells us that the clothes were actually left in the tomb. So he had to undress, fold his clothes, and then do all of this naked, beat off the guards, escape. It's just dumb, right? What we know historically is Jesus died, and he died by crucifixion. We know that he was buried in a tomb of a rich man, Joseph of Arimathea. We know that the tomb 3 days later was found empty. We know that it was found empty. Some people say, maybe they went to the wrong tomb. Again, the empty tomb is not why these people are dying for their faith. They're dying for their faith because they see the resurrected Jesus. Plus, I feel like someone would just say, you went to the wrong tomb, here's the body. So the tomb is found empty. Women were the first witnesses. You ask why that's a point. In the ancient culture, women's testimony was considered very negative. You didn't want women to be the first witnesses or any witness, which is why some of the Gnostic writings later on, they actually change this and they make it so the first witnesses are all the religious leaders. It's a false gospel. You can tell they want to get away from women being the first witnesses, and that gives you an actual idea of what it looks like when someone is making up a story. They put all the right people all at the right time for that culture. The Bible tells it like it actually is. Women were the first witnesses to the resurrection. Many individuals and groups experienced appearances of the risen Jesus. They saw the risen Jesus. The disciples sincerely believed Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to them. Even if you say they're wrong, set that aside for a moment. They sincerely thought they saw him because that's what they went and they died for. Paul converts. James, the skeptical brother, converts. The resurrection message was proclaimed very early, very quickly in the first century. And when you take all of these details, you have a Roman guard that's set at the tomb, you have the Roman seal that's over the tomb, you take all of the historical data that we know. And the logical conclusion is Jesus rose from the dead. Can you create conspiracies that say something else? Sure. Can you create conspiracies that maybe Jesus had a twin brother? And that's a real one. Maybe a conspiracy, not a real person. Maybe Jesus had a twin brother. And maybe this twin brother, after the resurrection, after the cross, stole the body, got it out of the tomb, fought off the Romans, took the body, but folded the clothes before he left and left them in the tomb. And then once he stashed the body somewhere else, he appeared to everybody as this identical twin, trying to convince them that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, ignoring the part that he's got to get the body away from the Romans, Jesus, when he appears, he also has the scars from his crucifixion. That's why when doubting Thomas comes to him, he says to put his fingers in his hands and in his side. Jesus has holes in both of his wrists, is where that would be, and then in his side, and then in his legs. And so this individual must have been really committed, because they wouldn't have known Jesus would have been stabbed in the side until it happened. And so on Friday, this happens to Jesus, and this twin needs to be ready to go by Sunday morning. And so he has to crucify himself, stab himself in the side, and recover by Sunday to go steal the body. Is it possible? Yeah, I mean, possible. In one way, you could say, yes, some of these conspiracies are possible, like they're in the realm of possible material reality in this world, but they're dumb, and we all know they're not true, and we know that clearly the evidence overwhelmingly points in the direction that Jesus just rose from the dead. And so instead of getting speculative about everything, which seems to be the pattern of our culture, instead of looking for a conspiracy theory under every rock, instead of trying to pull these predictions of some movie 26 years ago and saying that's what this whole assassination is based on, let's just step back for a moment and say Charlie Kirk was assassinated and murdered. It's a horrible thing. It was done by a supposed suspect named Tyler Robinson. I know there's no shortage of conspiracies that he's not the shooter, that it has nothing to do with him, that there's a different shooter and he's the fall guy, and just set that aside for a moment. Because that's not what the evidence is pointing to right now. And if more evidence comes out that supports that, then maybe shift in that direction. But what we ought to do as biblically minded individuals is to be logical in our thinking, because logic is a reflection of the mind of God. Don't go down these rabbit holes. Don't go deep into conspiracy theories that are unfalsifiable and unproven. Stick with what we know. Stick with reality. At this point, the strongest case is that this has nothing to do with a movie. It has to do with somebody with connections to kind of trans LGBTQ radicalization by the name of Tyler Robinson, it looks like, shot someone named Charlie Kirk for his faith and for his stances on those important issues. Don't distract from what's actually happening. Don't distract from the reality that what we should be doing right now is forwarding the message Charlie Kirk stood for, and taking the same stands, taking a stand for what is good, for what is just, and for what is true, just like he did. Thanks for watching. Okay. That was like 36 minutes.